Hi, so I'm Madison Strakis, and I'm going to talk about a poem called America's Welcome Home by Henry Van Dyke. So I'm going to start off with like a little bit of history of World War One and also the author. I'm not going to bore you, so it's just going to be a little bit. So about the author, we'll start off with Henry Van Dyke was born on November 10th, 1852, and he died on April 10, 1933, and he was 80 years old. He was known to be an author, educator, and clergyman. So he's also from Pennsylvania, which I thought was pretty cool, and he went to Princeton University. So, some facts about World War One. It started on July 1914 and it ended November 11th, 1918. And it started when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. And for the war, there was two powers, Central Power and Allied Power. The Central Power consisted of Germany, Austria, Hungary, Bulgaria, and the Ottoman Empire. And then the Allied Power consisted of Great Britain, France, Russia, Italy, Romania, Japan, and then the United States. Though the United States didn't enter the war until 1917, and so pretty much the US at first wanted to stay neutral under President Woodrow Wilson, but because of the aggression that Germany took on different submarines and ships that had passengers on it, they thought that they had no choice but to enter the war. So, actually, on April 6th, 1970, the U.S. entered the war. And so, as you can see, that it took them 3 years to enter the war, but it only took them 1 year to win the war, which I thought was pretty cool. And then World War One took the lives of more than 9 million people, and 1.7 million of those were actually Americans. So even though, again, they didn't enter the war until after 3 years, they still had like a huge casualty impact. And the war ended because the peace treaty was signed, and that peace treaty was called the Treaty of Versailles. So that's enough about history. I will talk about the poem now. So I'm going to put the poem somewhere up on this video. I just have to figure out where, but it's going to be somewhere so you can read it along as I talk about some of the major points that I'm going to say. But the first point that I wanted to bring up, because it was the first thing that came to my head when I read it, was the verse that says, "They battled for the rights of the man besides our brave allies, and now that they are coming home to us with the glory in their eyes." So I thought this verse was really nice because even it's, as I stated before, the United States didn't enter the war until 1917, and they still lost a lot of men, though, because they won. I thought the coming home was just that more sweet. Of course, coming home from war is happy because you made it out alive, and no matter what, you get to be with your family. But because the Allies won and the United States played a huge part in that, I thought that was a good verse to kind of show how powerful that win and coming home kind of was. And then I also liked that the author brought so much emotion into the poem. So one thing that I wanted to touch on was that he uses words such as bold and true to describe the different soldiers. He also touched a lot about oceans, which I don't know if he did this intentionally or I just saw it while reading the poem, but I wanted to point out the fact that that's the reason why the United States went into the World War One, was because of Germany and the Central Power kind of coming into our waters and hurting our people and our ships and our submarines. So they kept talking about the ocean. So I kind of made that connection with history. And I don't know, again, I don't know if he meant to do that, but I wouldn't know why. So I think that he did a good job with putting in that history. And then this also might be a stretch, but it did come to my head the first time I read this poem. So, a connection that I thought I'd share, which might be a long shot again, but it reminded me a lot of the song America the Beautiful, um, with just like the love of the brotherhood and America that both of these like things share. So the one verse, which is probably one of the most famous verses of the song, is America, America, God shed his grace on thee and crown thy God with brotherhood from sea to shining sea. I just think that like really touched based on the poem with like both speaking about brotherhood and then the seas and just like America and how powerful and beautiful and strong it is. And I thought that that is just something that I liked to share. Um, he also, not just about America, he also brought up the other allied countries, which I thought was pretty nice of him because, like, when reading like the title and stuff, you would think that he would just talk about America in general, but he brought all about like the other allied countries and how awesome they were as well. So he did start by saying that the United States was a big, beautiful country, and then he went on to say that noble faith of Great Britain, hero heart France, and Italy's romance. And I liked this because it did show how strong and like close these allied countries were because like working together was really the major reason why like the allies won the war. And um, one of the last things that I wanted to touch on was I wanted to say that I also liked how he brought up like the death of soldiers as well. So he had this one verse that said, "Oh, welcome home in the heavens peace, dear spirits of the dead." So again, like when I first read the title, because I wanted to analyze the title before I read the poem. So when I analyzed the title, I kind of thought that it was just going to be about like the soldiers that came home alive to their families. But I thought that that was a really cool tribute that he did to the soldiers that didn't make it. So I just wanted to point that out that I thoroughly enjoyed that because it shows like so much respect for the soldiers that like took their lives to save like all of these other countries and that they still like even though they didn't come home to their families and friends and stuff like they still have a home and now it's heaven and like they did so much to get there. So I thought that that was like a really cool thing to say. And then I also wanted to touch base on my favorite line of this poem, and that was, "You fought to make the whole world free, and the victory is won." So I know I touched base a lot about this, but like I just wanted to again, like I wanted to hit home with it because like I just think that this is kind of like a major point of this poem and kind of like history itself. So like I said, I'm gonna point to it again that the war didn't start until 1914 and it ended 4 years later in 1918, but the United States only came in 1917 and still made a huge impact. And I think without the United States coming into the war, the whole entire history could have been changed and altered. Like, I don't know if the Allied countries would have been strong enough to beat the Central countries because Germany was that powerful, which we also come to see in World War II. But um, I just think that that verse really brought it home for this poem in the fact that it showed how much America did for the Allies and just America in general. Like, I think it kind of helped the American people also see how strong we are as a country and how much value we have. Um, so overall, like I just believe that this poem really touches base on all of the war, the good, the bad, and in between. Kind of like with the good, like I said, kind of just like how like beautiful and how strong and how bold and true that the soldiers in America are in general. And I think that was a huge thing that I saw in this poem. And the bad, of course, like the casualties, like they did touch home on that. It was a great respect and tribute to those soldiers, but it still was sad to read. And then the in between was kind of just like bringing the history into it. So it was like about the oceans and kind of stuff like that. And then um, all in all, I think like what I took most about this poem was really the brotherhood and all about like just the impact America had and like just like how much respect I have for this country. Like of course I had respect for America before this, but I just like really enjoyed this poem because I didn't think poems could really bring this much history, emotions, and stuff like all together. And I thought overall that this poem did a great job with showing what World War One was really all about on an emotional standpoint.